The Heart of Time. Part 1, Echo in Time. The sound was the first thing to return. Not a sound of triumph, or of peace, but the low, rhythmic hiss of water withdrawing over fine, black sand. It was a sound of ending. Of absence. Elard Viren stood on the shore, the cold seeping through his worn boots. In his hands, he held the thing he had crossed oceans and shattered time to find. The Heart of Time. It was not a heart of flesh, nor a gem of brute crystal, but a sphere of captured light, the size of a grapefruit, cradled in a lattice of metal that was neither silver nor iron, but something forgotten by the world. It pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, each beat a silent wave that washed over him, through him. He felt its rhythm in his teeth, in the marrow of his bones. It was the pulse of the world itself, and it was dying in his grasp. He was alone. The air tasted of ozone and salt, and of something else, something ancient and metallic, like the memory of lightning. Behind him, the temple lay in ruins, not from violence, but from a profound and sudden exhaustion. The great stone arches, which had moments before hummed with impossible energy, were now just rock, crumbling back into the embrace of the jungle. The glowing runes that had guided their desperate path were extinguished, their light swallowed by the oppressive gray of a dawn that felt like a betrayal. Dawn. It should have been a beginning. Instead, it was the final note of an elegy. His gaze was fixed not on the temple, nor on the artifact that had been the purpose of his every waking thought for months, but on the empty space before him. A space that, until a handful of heartbeats ago, had been filled with her. Selena. The memory of her was not a memory yet, it was a fresh, bleeding wound. He could still feel the ghost of her touch on his skin, the warmth of her breath against his neck from the single, stolen night they had shared. A night that had felt like an eternity and had passed in the blink of an eye. He could see her face, not as it was in the end, etched with a sorrowful resolve, but as it had been in the flickering firelight of the temple's inner sanctum. The way her eyes, the color of a twilight sea, had held his, seeing not the weary, desperate innkeeper he had been, but the man he had become for her. For their cause. Some loves are not bound by years, Elard, she had whispered, her voice a melody that harmonized with the hum of the ancient stones. They are bound by moments. A single moment can contain a universe. Ours did. He had not understood, not fully. He had been drunk on the proximity of her, on the terrifying, exhilarating reality of their mission's end. He had believed, foolishly, that the hardest choice was behind them. He was wrong. The hardest choice was the last one. And it had taken her from him. A vortex of shimmering, fractured light had erupted where the altar had stood. It was not a thing of this world. It was a tear in the fabric of reality, a wound in time itself. It pulled at everything, the light, the air, the very sense of gravity. And it had pulled at her. Morvian Cedrus, the pirate philosopher with his charming smile and eyes full of broken timelines, had lunged for the heart. He had not wanted to destroy it, he had screamed. He wanted to free it. To break the cycle, to let time run wild and unshackled, a river flooding its banks. In that chaos, he promised, everyone could be saved. Lyrain would live, whole and healthy. Selena would be free of her eternal guardianship. A paradise of second chances. Elard had seen the madness in that promise, the beautiful, seductive lie. A river without banks is not a river, it is a deluge that drowns everything. To save one life, to save his daughter's life, he would have to condemn all of time to anarchy. It was a price he had been prepared to consider, until he looked at Selena. She had not pleaded with him. She had simply looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw the truth of millennia. She was the last guardian. Her spirit was woven into the heart. To let Morvian seize it was not to free her, it was to unravel her. To grant Lyrain a life in a broken world was no life at all. The choice had been a silent scream in his soul. The artifact, cool and heavy in his hand, had seemed to weigh the fate of all things. He made his decision. He wrenched the heart away from Morvian's grasp, and in that same motion, he channeled its remaining power not forward, but backward. A reset. A cessation. The energy backlash was immense. It threw Morvian back into the swirling vortex, his cry of rage and betrayal swallowed by the roaring silence of collapsing time. But the vortex, destabilized, began to collapse in on itself. And it demanded an anchor. A sacrifice to seal the wound it had become. Sayelina had stepped forward. Not in fear, but with a terrible, serene acceptance. "It was always this," she said, her voice impossibly calm amidst the storm. She reached out, and her fingers, warm and real, brushed his cheek. "The heart chose you not because you were a king or a warrior, Elard. It chose you because you are a father. You understand the cost of love. You know that some goodbyes are the price of a future." "No," he had choked out, the word torn from him. "There has to be another way. There is always another way." She smiled then, a smile that held the sadness of 1,000 sunsets. "There are infinite ways. But only one where she lives. Where the world lives. This is not a tragedy, my love. This is the geometry of fate. Our lines intersected. For a moment, we were one. That moment has to be enough to sustain the weight of eternity." She turned from him and walked into the heart of the light. She did not scream. She seemed to dissolve, her form unwinding into strands of golden light that were drawn into the vortex, stitching it closed from the inside out. The last thing he saw was her face, turned back to him one final time, not in pain, but in a state of grace that shattered him more completely than any agony could. Then, silence. The vortex was gone. The temple's energy was spent. The dawn broke. And he was alone. Now, on the shore, holding the inert, cooling weight of the heart of time, the full force of his victory crashed down upon him. He had saved his daughter. He had saved the world. And he had lost the second heart that had begun to beat within his chest. He had traded a future with Sayelina for Lyrain's future. A fair trade. A father's trade. And it felt like damnation. A wave, larger than the others, rushed up the beach and swirled around his ankles, shockingly cold. It broke his stupor. He looked down at the artifact. Its light was faint now, a dormant ember. What was he to do with it? Hide it? Destroy it? Could it even be destroyed? The knowledge felt like a burden too great for any one man to bear. He thought of Lyrain, her small body racked with the coughing fits that stole her breath, her skin pale against the pillows of her room above the inn. He saw her smile, so brave, so undeserving of the fate that had been written for her. He had done this for her. This hollow victory, this silence where a heartbeat should be, was for her. The cost of power is the memory of the price you paid, Arden, the alchemist, had told him in his cluttered study, the air thick with the smell of strange herbs and older secrets. And the greatest power is the power to choose which price is worth paying. Elard had paid. He had paid with blood, with fear, with the trust of men who had followed him, and with the love of the woman who had guided him. He clutched the heart to his chest, as if he could absorb what remained of her essence from its cold surface. But there was nothing. Only the echo of the sea, the whisper of the wind through the palm fronds, and the vast, unbearable silence she had left behind. This was the shore of forever. This was the price of time. And as he stood there, the chosen one, the savior, the widower of a love that had lasted only a night, Elard Viren began to understand that some victories are indistinguishable from defeat. The puzzle was complete, the pieces fitted together through pain and sacrifice. And the picture it revealed was of a man standing alone, holding the answer to every question but one, how to live with the echo of what it cost. The sea hissed its retreat, a sound like the world letting out a long, weary sigh. Part 2, The Inn at the Edge of the World. The memory of the black sand and the dying light of the heart was a phantom limb, an ache in a part of his soul that hadn't existed months ago. But here, now, in the thick, peat smoke haze of the present, Elard Viren was just an innkeeper. The past was a shore he had not yet reached, the future, a fever dream in a room upstairs. The driftwood hunched on the cliff's edge like a weary old sailor, its timbers salted gray by a lifetime of Atlantic gales. It was a place of endings, the last outpost before the charts turned blank and the sea legends began. From its windows, on a clear day, you could see the perpetual bank of mist that marked the edge of the known world, the shroud, men called it, a wall of gray that swallowed ships and secrets with equal indifference. Tonight, the shroud was invisible, cloaked by a darkness so complete it felt solid. A storm was brewing, not the common, blustering kind that rattled shutters, but a deep, atmospheric pressure that made the candles gutter and the air hum with a low, sub-audible thrum. It was a pressure Elard felt in his old wound, a tightness above his hip where a splintered tiller had caught him during a life he'd long since abandoned. He stood behind the scarred length of mahogany that served as his bar, polishing a glass with a threadbare cloth. The motion was automatic, a meditation. Each slow circle was a ward against the silence of the inn, a silence punctuated only by the crackle of the great fireplace and the soft, ragged cough that drifted down from the room above. Liren. Each cough was a hook in his heart, a tiny, sharp pull of fear. He would pause, his polishing suspended, listening for the next breath. When it came, shallow but steady, he would resume his circular, futile motion. The physician from the port town, a man with tired eyes and leeches in a jar, had spoken of weakness of the blood and congestion of the humors. He'd left a bitter-smelling tonic that stained Liren's lips purple and did nothing to stop the slow fading of the light in her eyes. Elard's gaze drifted from the glass to the window, where his own reflection stared back, a man in his late 30s, with a face that had been kind once, before worry had etched permanent lines around his eyes and mouth. His hair, once dark as the wet cliffs, was shot through with gray at the temples. He looked what he was, a man holding onto the edge of the world by his fingernails. The door groaned open, cutting through the storm's prelude. The wind snatched at it, whipping rain into the room like a handful of thrown gravel. Two figures stood silhouetted against the tumultuous night. The first was a man, tall and gaunt, wrapped in a traveling cloak that seemed to drink the light. Water streamed from its folds, pooling on the floorboards. But it was his face that caught Elard's attention, pale, sharp-featured, with eyes that were too dark, too intense. They scanned the room not with the weary relief of a traveler finding shelter, but with the analytical coldness of a surveyor assessing a potential battlefield. This was a man who carried a storm inside him. The second figure was smaller, shrouded in a hooded cloak of simple, gray wool. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed unaffected by the wind's push, stepping inside as if entering a sacred space. The hood was pulled low, shadowing the face entirely. "Welcome to the driftwood," Elard said, his voice roughened by disuse. He set the glass down. "You found the last hearth before the shroud. Shelter from the storm is 5 coppers ahead. Ale is 2. The tall man's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll take the shelter. And whatever hot meal you have." His voice was cultured, yet it had a strange, metallic resonance, like a bell struck underwater. He threw a silver coin onto the bar, a fortune in a place that usually traded in copper. "And silence. We value our privacy." Elard nodded slowly, his innkeeper's instincts prickling. He pocketed the coin. "The common room is empty. You can take the table by the fire. I've a stew on the hob." As the man moved towards the fireplace, his cloak shedding water like a seabird's wings, Elard's attention was drawn to the cloaked figure. They had remained by the door, head tilted as if listening to a sound only they could hear. Then, the hood turned slightly, and for a fleeting second, Elard caught a glimpse of the face within. It was a woman. Her skin was pale, her features finely drawn. But it was her eyes, he saw them only for a moment before the shadows reclaimed them, that stopped his breath. They were the color of a sea at twilight, and they held an ancient, profound calm that was utterly alien to this storm-lashed edge of the world. In their depths, he saw not curiosity or weariness, but a kind of recognition. Then the moment passed. She glided past him towards the fire, leaving no puddles in her wake, as if the rain had dared not touch her. A faint scent trailed behind her, not of perfume, but of ozone and cold stone, like the air after a lightning strike or deep within a forgotten cave. He served them stew in heavy earthenware bowls, and a loaf of dark bread. The man ate with a swift, efficient hunger. The woman, Saelina, though he did not yet know her name, ate slowly, her movements economical and precise. She did not remove her hood. Elard retreated behind his bar, the phantom sensation of those twilight eyes lingering on him. He tried to return to his polishing, but the rhythm was broken. The storm outside seemed to have entered the inn, contained within the silent, intense presence of his two guests. He felt like an actor on a stage, waiting for a play to begin whose script he had not read. Another cough from upstairs, sharper this time, a sound that tore at the fabric of the night. Elard flinched, his knuckles whitening on the glass. The tall man looked up from his bowl, his dark eyes fixing on Elard. "Your child is unwell." It wasn't a question. It was a statement, flat and certain. "My daughter," Elard corrected, a defensive edge in his voice. "A passing fever." The lie was automatic, a father's shield. The man's thin smile returned. Fevers do not usually sound so entrenched. So hungry. He took a sip of ale. "I am called Morvian. I have some knowledge of the ailments that afflict the body. And the spirit." Before Elard could respond, a fit of coughing seized Lyrain, louder, more desperate. It was the sound that heralded the bad nights, the nights where he would sit by her bed, holding her small, hot hand, praying for the dawn. Excusing himself with a muttered word, he abandoned his post and took the stairs two at a time, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Her room was small, lit by a single candle. Lyrain was propped up on pillows, her small body trembling with the effort of each breath. Her face was flushed, her hair damp with sweat. "Papa," she gasped between coughs. "It's hard to breathe." "I know, little wave," he murmured, sitting on the edge of the bed and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. The pet name was a relic from her infancy, when she had been as constant and lively as the sea. Now, the sea was in her lungs, drowning her from within. "Just breathe slowly. I'm here." He held a cup of water to her lips, his own breath catching in sympathy with her struggle. In these moments, the world shrank to this room, to the battle being fought in this tiny chest. The inn, the storm, the strange guests, all of it faded into insignificance. There was only his daughter, and the terrifying, slow leak of her life. When the fit finally subsided, leaving her exhausted and asleep, he sat there for a long time, just watching the fragile rise and fall of her chest. The fear was a cold stone in his gut. The physician had offered no hope, only expensive delays. He felt the walls of his life closing in, the certain, crushing trajectory of his future. He was going to watch his daughter die in this room, in this inn, at the edge of the world. When he descended back to the common room, his steps were heavy with despair. The fire had burned lower. Morvian was staring into the flames, his profile sharp and predatory. The woman, Saelina, was gone, presumably to the room he had assigned them. Morvian spoke without turning. "The world is a web of cause and effect, innkeeper. A child's illness here, a storm at sea there. All threads in the same tapestry." He finally looked at Elard, and his eyes seemed to capture the firelight, glowing with a faint, red intensity. "Some believe the tapestry is fixed. Woven by indifferent hands. I believe the threads can be rearranged. That time is not a river flowing in one direction, but a sea, with currents that can be navigated by those who possess the correct charts." Elard leaned against the bar, weary to his bone. "Philosophy won't help my daughter." "No," Morvian agreed softly. "But a cure might. A true cure. Not the poultices and prayers of provincial physicians. He stood, his height suddenly imposing in the low-ceilinged room. I carry something. A map, of sorts. To a place where such things are possible. Where time itself can be bargained with. He reached inside his cloak and withdrew a scroll case, not of leather or wood, but of a dull, grey metal that seemed to absorb the light. He placed it on the bar between them. Guard this. Until the morning. Its fate, and perhaps your daughter's, may be intertwined. He turned and ascended the stairs to the guest rooms, leaving Elard alone in the silent common room. The storm raged outside, but the inn felt unnaturally still. Elard stared at the scroll case. It was cold to the touch, and perfectly seamless. He couldn't see how to open it. A map? To a cure? It was madness. The ramblings of a traveler addled by the storm and his own strange intellect. And yet the man had known about Lyrane. He had spoken of time as a sea. And the woman with the eyes of a twilight sea. Hesitantly, Elard picked up the case. As his fingers closed around it, a jolt, like a static shock, ran up his arm. And for a fraction of a second, so brief he thought he imagined it, he felt a warmth from within, a single, faint pulse, like a heartbeat. Then it was gone. The case was just cold, inert metal again. But the echo of that pulse remained, a tiny, impossible seed of hope planted in the barren soil of his despair. He looked towards the stairs, towards the room where the mysterious guest slept, and then up towards the room where his daughter fought for breath. The game was afoot. And he, the reluctant innkeeper, had just been dealt a card he didn't know how to play. The storm outside, he realized, was only the beginning. Part 3, The Dead Stranger. Sleep was a fractured thing, a shallow pool Elard could not fully immerse himself in. The cold weight of the metal scroll case lay on the bedside table, a presence as tangible as a second person in the room. He kept expecting another pulse, a sign, but there was only the oppressive silence, broken by the storm's fury and the ragged soundtrack of Lyrane's breathing from the next room. The stranger's words, a map, of sorts, echoed in the dark, twisting into fantastical shapes. A cure. A bargain with time. It was the kind of desperate nonsense a drowning man clings to, and he was drowning, had been drowning for months. He must have drifted off, because the sound that woke him was not the wind or his daughter's cough, but something else entirely, a soft, wet exhalation, followed by the heavy, final thud of a body hitting the floorboards upstairs. Elard was on his feet instantly, the worn floorboards cold beneath his bare feet. His heart, a moment ago sluggish with sleep, was now a frantic drum against his ribs. He snatched the heavy iron poker from the hearth in his room, its weight a familiar, grim comfort. The inn was dark, the fire downstairs reduced to embers that painted the common room in pulses of dying red light. He crept up the stairs to the guest rooms, each creak of the wood sounding like a thunderclap in the tense silence. The door to the room he had assigned to Morvian and the woman was ajar. A sliver of darkness bled from the opening. Pushing it open slowly, poker raised, he peered inside. The room was lit by a single candle guttering on the windowsill, casting long, dancing shadows. Morvian was on his knees, his back to the door. He was not moving. And then Elard saw the dark, glistening pool spreading around the man's knees, soaking into the rough wool of the rug. The coppery tang of blood filled the small space, thick and nauseating. Morvian. Elard's voice was a hoarse whisper. The tall man did not respond. He swayed slightly, then collapsed forward onto his face with a sickening finality. Behind him, standing perfectly still near the room's other door, the one that connected to the second guest chamber, was the cloaked woman, Sayelina. Her hood was thrown back now, and her face, illuminated by the frantic candlelight, was a mask of serene, unearthly calm. There was no shock, no fear. Her twilight-sea eyes were fixed on the dead man, but they held no grief. Only a deep, profound knowing. And her hands. They were clean. There was no blood on them. What happened? Elard demanded, stepping into the room, his gaze darting from the body to the woman to the shadows in the corners. Who did this? Sayalina's gaze shifted from Morvian to Elard. It was like a physical touch, cool and assessing. The current he sought to navigate, she said, her voice melodious yet devoid of emotion, has a fierce undertow. There are always other sailors on the sea of time, innkeeper. Some with sharper knives. Her words made no sense, but the immediate, practical horror of the situation crashed down on him. There was a dead man in his inn. A murdered man. This meant the constables from the port, questions, suspicions. The inn would be shuttered. Lyrain, in her weakened state, exposed to the chaos and the damp of a jail cell if he were arrested. The thought was a spike of pure ice in his veins. He knelt beside Morvian, rolling him onto his back. The man's dark eyes were open, staring at the ceiling beams with a look of profound surprise. His traveling tunic was slashed open across the abdomen, a deep, cruel wound that spoke of a single, efficient blow. But there was something else. From the wound, faintly, a shimmer seemed to emanate, not of blood, but of light, a distorted, fractured glow, like sunlight seen through cracked glass. By the deep, Elard breathed, recoiling. Do not touch the light, Sayalina warned, her voice gaining a sharp edge for the first time. It is unstable. A paradox made manifest. Elard stared at her. Paradox? What in the name of all that's holy are you talking about? Who are you? Before she could answer, a faint, rhythmic knocking started at the inn's main door downstairs. It was not the frantic pounding of a traveler seeking shelter from the storm, which had now abated to a steady, sullen rain. This was a deliberate, measured sound. Thump. 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 Like a slow heartbeat. Sayalina's calm finally fractured. A flicker of urgency crossed her features. They are here. The cult of the echo. They have come for the map. The map? Elard's eyes fell on the grey metal scroll case, which lay on the small table by the bed. It was glowing now, a soft, greenish luminescence that pulsed in time with the knocking from downstairs. There is no time to explain, Sayalina said, moving swiftly to the case. She did not touch it directly, but wrapped it in a fold of her cloak before picking it up. The light dimmed slightly, contained. They will not ask politely. They will burn this place to the ground and sift the ashes for what they seek. You must take it. You and your daughter must flee. Flee. To where? This is my home. It is a location, she said, her eyes locking with his. The depth in them was terrifying. And locations can be lost. Your daughter's life is a thread. Would you rather lose the location, or the thread? The knocking downstairs ceased. A moment of silence, more threatening than any noise, was followed by the sound of the heavy iron bolt on the main door being slid back. Not broken. Slid back, with a smooth, oiled precision that was impossible from the outside. They were inside. Elard's mind, fogged with shock and fear, snapped into a sharp, crystalline focus. This was no longer about a strange death or philosophical riddles. This was an invasion. A threat to Lyrain. The father in him overpowered the bewildered innkeeper. He grabbed Sayalina's arm. The back stairs. To the kitchen. Now. He snatched the poker again and led the way, moving with a predator's silence he hadn't known he still possessed. They slipped out of the room and down the narrow, hidden servant staircase that led to the kitchen. The air down here was warm, smelling of stale stew and damp wood. From the common room, they heard voices, low, guttural, speaking a language that slithered and grated, full of sharp consonants and sibilant hisses. There were at least 3 of them, maybe more. He heard the sound of upturned tables, the clatter of tankards being swept from the bar. They are searching, Sayalina whispered. They can feel the map's resonance, but my cloak muddles it. We have only moments. Elard's eyes darted around the kitchen. The back door led to the cliff path, a treacherous route in the dark and the rain. But it was the only way. He had a rowboat hidden in a cove below, his last secret escape from a life he thought he'd left behind. "The cove," he hissed. "We can take the boat." "No," Sayelina said, her voice firm. "The sea is their element. They will be watching. There is another way." She moved to the large, cold larder, pushing aside sacks of potatoes and onions to reveal a section of the wall that looked no different from any other. But she pressed her palm against a specific stone, and with a soft grind, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a dark, narrow space beyond. A priest hole. A relic from a time when the inn had been a safe house for heretics, a secret his grandfather had shown him long ago. He had forgotten it entirely. "In," she commanded. They squeezed into the dank, cramped space. Elard pulled the hidden door closed just as the kitchen door swung open. Through a tiny, cleverly disguised crack in the stonework, he could see into the kitchen. The figures that entered were not men. Not entirely. They were clad in dark, scaled leathers that seemed to shift color in the dim light. Their faces were pale and drawn, their eyes solid black, like lumps of jet. They moved with an unnerving, fluid coordination, their heads tilting as if listening to frequencies beyond human hearing. One of them, taller than the others, held a wickedly curved blade that still dripped with a dark fluid. Morvian's blood. The leader sniffed the air, his black eyes scanning the room. He pointed a long, thin finger towards the larder. "The echo is strong here," he hissed, his voice like dry leaves scraping together. "The map was in this room. Recently." Elard held his breath, his hand tightening on the poker. Sayelina stood perfectly still beside him, her presence a calming, cool pressure in the stifling darkness. He could feel the faint thrum of the map through the cloak she held. The cultist took a step towards the larder door. Elard prepared to fight, to die in this hole if it meant giving Sayelina a chance to get the map and Lyrain to safety. But then, from upstairs, came the sound he dreaded most. Lyrain's voice, weak and frightened. "Papa?" The cultist's head snapped up. A slow, cruel smile spread across his thin lips. He turned from the larder and gestured to his companions. "The thread is thin. Let us see how much tension it can bear before it snaps." They moved as one, flowing out of the kitchen and towards the main stairs. Elard's blood ran cold. The choice was gone. There was no more hiding, no more fleeing. The invaders were going for his daughter. He met Sayelina's eyes in the gloom. The calm in them was gone, replaced by a fierce, protective light that mirrored his own. "The map is yours now, Elard Viren," she whispered, pressing the cold, cloth-wrapped cylinder into his hands. "Its fate is yours. As is mine." He didn't question how she knew his name. He took the map. The moment his skin touched the cloth covering it, a jolt of energy, vast and terrifying, shot up his arm. It was not a single pulse this time, but a flood. Visions flickered behind his eyes, a storm-tossed ship with glowing sails, a jungle island under a green sun, a temple of black stone, and a vortex of light swallowing a woman with twilight eyes. It was a future, his future, slamming into him all at once. The shock of it staggered him. But it also forged him. The frightened innkeeper was burned away in that instant, replaced by something harder, sharper. A father with a purpose. He pushed open the hidden door, the iron poker feeling less like a tool and more like a weapon. He looked at Sayelina, and then towards the stairs where the monsters were ascending. "Stay with her," he said, his voice low and steady. "Get her to the boat if you can." Then Elard Viren, the man who had chosen a quiet life, stepped out of the darkness to meet the cult of the echo. Part 4, The Heart of Time. The world narrowed to the space between the kitchen door and the foot of the stairs. The air, thick with the smell of blood and rain, crackled with a violence that was both physical and something else, something older. The three cultists were already halfway up, moving with that eerie, silent grace, their black eyes fixed on the landing above, on the door behind which his daughter lay helpless. Elard did not shout. A roar of defiance would only hasten their progress. Instead, he moved with a silence born of desperation, crossing the common room in 3 long strides. The chaos of the overturned tables and chairs was a map of their intrusion, a desecration of his small, hard-won peace. It fueled the cold fire igniting in his gut. He reached the base of the stairs as the lead cultist placed a hand on the banister, preparing to take the final steps to the landing. Elard didn't hesitate. He swung the iron poker not at the man, but at the wooden banister itself, a few inches below the cultist's grip. The crack of splintering oak was like a gunshot in the tense silence. The banister, old and dry, gave way with a satisfying snap. The cultist, his weight suddenly unsupported, lurched forward with a grunt of surprise. It was the opening Elard needed. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his bare feet slapping against the wood. The second cultist turned, his jet-black eyes widening slightly. He brought his curved blade up, but Elard was already inside his guard. He drove the pointed end of the poker like a spear into the man's side, feeling a sickening pop as it slid between ribs. The cultist let out a choked gasp, more air than sound, and crumpled. But there were 2 more. The leader, who had regained his balance, and the third, who was now turning on the narrow staircase. Elard was trapped between them. The leader smiled, a ghastly stretching of pale lips. "The thread is eager to be cut," he hissed, leveling his bloody blade. A flicker of movement from the landing above. Sayelina stood there, Lyrain clutched protectively behind her. The girl's face was a mask of terror, her eyes huge. Sayelina's own gaze was fixed on the leader. She didn't move to attack, but simply raised her hand, palm outward. A wave of force, silent and invisible, slammed into the cultist leader. It didn't throw him back, it stilled him. His smile froze. The air around him seemed to thicken, to congeal. He struggled, his movements becoming slow, ponderous, as if he were moving through deep water. His black eyes bulged with a confusion that was almost comical. Elard didn't waste the gift. He spun, driving the butt of the poker into the knee of the third cultist behind him. The man screamed, a high, sharp sound, as his leg bent the wrong way. Elard shoved him down the stairs, where he landed in a heap at the bottom, moaning. He turned back to the leader, still trapped in Sayelina's temporal snare. The man was fighting it, his muscles straining, the air cracking with the strain of paradox. Elard raised the poker, aiming for the man's heart. This was kill or be killed. This was for Lyrain. "No, Papa." Lyrain's voice, thin and reedy, stopped him. He looked at his daughter, saw the horror in her eyes not at the cultists, but at him, at the murderous intent on his face. In that moment, he saw himself as she must see him, a wild-eyed stranger, covered in blood, poised to strike a killing blow. The hesitation was all the leader needed. With a final, gargantuan effort, he broke free from Sayelina's hold. The released energy threw Sayelina back against the wall with a cry. Instead of attacking, the leader gave Elard a look of pure, undiluted hatred, then leaped over the banister, landing with a cat-like grace on the common room floor below. He grabbed his injured companion and, with a last glare, vanished out the inn's shattered door and into the storm-lashed night. Silence descended, broken only by Lyrain's quiet sobs and the ragged sound of Elard's own breathing. The adrenaline drained from him, leaving him shaking and hollow. He dropped the poker, the clatter loud in the sudden quiet, and rushed to his daughter, gathering her into his arms. "It's all right, little wave," he murmured, holding her tight. "It's all right. Papa's here." Over her shoulder, he looked at Sayelina. She was leaning against the wall, her face pale. The act of magic, or whatever it was, had cost her. But her eyes were clear, and they held his with an unnerving intensity. "They will return," she said softly. "With greater numbers. This place is no longer safe." Elard knew she was right. The driftwood inn, his sanctuary, his prison, was now a target. He looked at the dead cultist on the stairs, at the blood staining his floorboards. This was his life now. There was no going back. An hour later, the three of them were in the kitchen, the hidden door to the priest hole closed once more. Liren, sedated with a few drops of a calming draught Sayelina produced from a pouch at her belt, slept fitfully on a pile of sacks. The body of the cultist had been unceremoniously dragged into the larder. The storm had passed, leaving a pre-dawn hush in its wake. Elard sat at the kitchen table, the metal scroll case before him. It was no longer glowing, but he could still feel its potential, a dormant power humming just beneath the surface. Sayelina sat opposite him, her hands folded on the table. "Who are you?" Elard asked, the question hanging in the air between them. "Truly. I am the last guardian of the heart of time," she said, her voice low and melodic. "Or, I was. My name is Sayelina. The man you knew as Morvian was Morvian Cedrus, the foremost philosopher of the cult of the Echo. He believed time was a prison to be broken. He stole the map from my temple, believing it would lead him to the heart, so he could shatter its vessel and set the flow of causality adrift." "The heart of time," Elard repeated, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "It's real. It is the anchor," she said, her gaze drifting to the sleeping Liren. "It is the reason the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. The reason a seed becomes a tree and a child becomes a woman. It maintains the sequence. Without it, time becomes chaos. A single moment could last an eternity, or a lifetime could pass in a blink. The past, present, and future would bleed together into a meaningless, screaming collage." Elard thought of the visions that had assaulted him when he touched the map. The ship, the island, the vortex. And this map leads to it. "The map is not a chart of places, but of possibilities," Sayelina explained. "It shows the path to the island of eternity, where the heart resides. But the path is not fixed. It changes. It is woven from moments of great temporal significance, from choices yet unmade. It can only be read by one who has a personal stake in the outcome. A thread, as Morvian said, that is tightly woven into the tapestry." She looked pointedly at Liren. "Your daughter is dying of a sickness that has no cure in this time. But in the presence of the heart, all times are one. A cure from a future age, or a past one, could be drawn to her. Her thread could be strengthened. It is possible." Hope, treacherous and painful, bloomed in Elard's chest. "You're saying this artifact can save her?" "I am saying it is the only thing that can," Sayelina said, her expression grave. "But the cost is great. The cult will follow the map's resonance. They will hunt you. And to reach the heart, you must navigate waters where reality itself is thin. You will see things that will break your mind if you are not prepared." And in the end, she paused, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of deep, personal sorrow in her eyes. "In the end, there is always a sacrifice. The heart demands balance." Elard looked from Sayelina's ancient, weary face to his daughter's small, sleeping one. The quiet innkeeper's life was gone, shattered like the door of his inn. Before him lay two paths, a certain, slow tragedy here, or a dangerous, uncertain quest with a glimmer of hope. A hope that demanded a price he could not yet fathom. He reached out and touched the cold metal of the map. This time, the visions were clearer. He saw a grand ship with sails like folded night, cutting through a phosphorescent sea. He saw a man with a kind, intelligent face, surrounded by alchemical instruments. He saw a vortex of light, and felt a love so profound and so tragic it stole his breath. He pulled his hand back, his heart pounding. The puzzle pieces were scattering before him, a chaotic jumble of past and future. But one piece was clear. The central piece. He made his choice. "What do I need to do?" Elard Viren asked, his voice steady, the father now fully in command. Sayelina nodded, a look of respect in her twilight eyes. "First," she said, "we need a ship. And there is only one man in this port mad enough, and rich enough, to fund a voyage to the edge of time." Part 5, A Father's Oath. The port city of Veridan's Gate sprawled like a dirty jewel in the crook of a storm-battered bay. It was a city of stark contrasts, the opulent, white stone manors of the merchant lords clinging to the cliffs, overlooking the teeming, reeking chaos of the docks below. The air was a thick soup of salt, fish guts, tar, and the faint, sweet smell of exotic spices from lands most sailors only dreamed of. It was a city of opportunities, most of them illegal, and of men who knew the price of everything, including a soul. Elard kept the hood of his cloak pulled low, the rough wool scratchy against his skin. Lyrain, swaddled in blankets and cradled in his arms, felt frighteningly light. Her breathing was a shallow whisper against his neck. Each step on the slick cobblestones was a jolt he feared would shatter her. Saelina walked beside him, a silent, grey-clad spectre. Her presence seemed to part the crowds, sailors and cutpurses alike gave her a wide berth, their eyes sliding away as if they couldn't quite focus on her. She was a pocket of calm in the city's frenetic pulse. They were a strange procession, a desperate father, a dying child, and a woman who was not quite of this world, heading towards the most notorious address in Veridan's Gate, the abode of Elard Viren. Trevar was not a king, but he might as well have been. He owned the largest private fleet on the western coast, ships that braved the shroud and returned with holds full of treasures and tales that curdled blood. He was a man of immense wealth and shadowy reputation, a patron of explorers and a rumored associate of pirates. He was also, according to Saelina, the only man with the resources and the recklessness to fund their quest. They reached a heavy, iron-banded door set into a wall of weathered granite. Two men with the bored, dangerous eyes of professional guards blocked their path. They were armed not with the pikes of the city watch, but with curved cutlasses and wheeled pistols tucked into their sashes. "State your business," one grunted, his gaze lingering on the bundle in Elard's arms. "We seek an audience with Lord Trevar," Elard said, his voice raspy from lack of sleep. "We have information regarding a matter of temporal significance." The guard's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected those words. He looked at Saelina, and a flicker of unease crossed his face. "Wait here." He disappeared inside, leaving his companion to stare them down. The minutes stretched. Lyrain coughed, a weak, rattling sound that made Elard's heart clench. He felt exposed, a target in this teeming city. Every shout, every clatter of a cart felt like the prelude to an attack by the cult of the echo. The guard returned, his expression unreadable. "He'll see you. Just you." He pointed at Elard. "The woman and the child stay here." "No," Elard said immediately, holding Lyrain tighter. "We stay together." The guard shrugged. "His terms." Saelina placed a calming hand on Elard's arm. "It is all right. Go. We are safe here for a time. The map's resonance is muffled by the city's noise. Speak to him. Tell him of the island. He will listen." Reluctantly, Elard passed Lyrain into Saelina's arms. The transfer felt like handing over his own heart. He gave his daughter a reassuring smile he didn't feel, then turned and followed the guard into the dim interior. The house was a fortress disguised as a residence. The corridors were narrow and windowless, lit by guttering torches that threw long, dancing shadows. They passed rooms filled with strange artifacts, a stuffed beast with too many eyes, a tapestry depicting a star chart that seemed to shift as he looked at it, a glass case containing what looked like a petrified mermaid. The air smelled of old wood, dust, and a faint, acrid scent of ozone, like after a lightning strike. He was led into a large, circular study. The walls were lined with books, but these were not the leather-bound volumes of a scholar. They were folios of sea charts, logs from lost voyages, and treatises on celestial navigation written in dead languages. In the center of the room, standing before a great window that looked out over the harbor, was Elard Viren. He was younger than Elard had expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with a lean, athletic build. His hair was the color of dark sand, tied back from a face that was handsome in a sharp, calculating way. He wore simple, expensive clothes, a dark tunic and trousers, with no jewelry save for a single, heavy signet ring on his finger. He held a navigator's compass in his hand, but it was not pointing north. The needle spun lazily, as if disoriented. "An innkeeper from the edge of the world," Trevar said, without turning around. His voice was calm, educated, but with an undercurrent of relentless energy. "And a woman who, according to my men, seems to be slightly out of phase with the rest of us. You speak of temporal significance. A dangerous subject." Elard stood his ground. "You know of Morvian Cedrus?" Trevar turned slowly. His eyes were a piercing, ice blue, and they missed nothing. They took in Elard's worn clothes, the blood stain he hadn't been able to fully scrub from his tunic, the desperate set of his jaw. "I know of him. A brilliant man. A dangerous fanatic. He came to me 6 months ago, seeking funding for an expedition. He spoke of an island that doesn't exist on any map. An island where time has no meaning. I declined. Investing in madness is poor business." "He's dead," Elard said flatly. "Murdered in Mayan by men who serve the cult he once led." A flicker of interest in the ice-blue eyes. "Is that so? And why would they kill their own prophet?" "Because he had something they wanted. And now I have it." Elard reached into his cloak and placed the metal scroll case on a nearby table. It lay there, inert and mysterious. Trevar's gaze fell upon it. The spinning needle of his compass gave a sudden, violent jerk, pointing directly at the case before resuming its aimless dance. Trevar's expression did not change, but Elard saw the subtle tightening of the muscles around his mouth. "The Chronos map," Trevar whispered, a hint of awe breaking through his cool facade. "I thought it a myth. It's real. And it leads to the heart of time. Sayalina, the woman outside, she is its guardian. She says the cult plans to shatter the heart. To break time itself." "And you?" Trevar asked, circling the table like a shark. "What does an innkeeper want with the pulse of the universe? This is not a quest for a man who simply wants to see the world." Elard's composure broke. The fear, the exhaustion, the love for his daughter, all surged to the surface. "My daughter is dying," he snapped, the words torn from him. "There is no cure. Not here, not now. Sayalina says the heart can save her. That it can draw a cure from another time. I don't care about time or destiny or your bloody investments. I care about my little girl. I will do anything. I will go to the edge of hell itself if it means she gets to live." He was breathing heavily, his fists clenched. He had laid himself bare before this powerful, cynical man. Caelorn Trevar studied him for a long, silent moment. The only sound was the faint hum of the city outside and the erratic spinning of the compass needle. "A father's oath," Trevar said finally, a strange, almost wistful note in his voice. "The most powerful force in any universe. More powerful than gold. More powerful, perhaps, than time." He walked to the window and looked out at his ships, tiny specks in the vast harbor. "Morvian offered me power over causality. The ability to rewrite mistakes. A tempting offer for a man with regrets. But it was an abstraction. You offer me something more tangible. A story. A quest for a child's life. There is a purity in that. A narrative thrust that appeals to me." He turned back to Elard, his decision made. "Very well, innkeeper. I will fund your voyage. I will give you my finest ship, the Echo Hunter. I will crew it with men who fear me more than they fear sea monsters. But understand this, it is my ship. My command. You and your guardian are my consultants. We find this island. We secure the heart. Your daughter gets her cure. And I get, the greatest discovery since the world was formed. Do we have an accord? Elard looked at the man, at the calculating eyes that saw his daughter's life as a compelling subplot in a grand adventure. He hated it. But he had no choice. This was the only thread he had to pull. We have an accord, Elard said, his voice hollow. Travar smiled, a thin, sharp expression. Excellent. We sail with the evening tide. Welcome to the grand game, Elard Viren. Try not to get us all erased from existence. As Elard left the study to retrieve Lyrain and Saelina, he felt the weight of the oath settle on his shoulders. He had traded the certainty of his daughter's death for a pact with a man who saw the world as a story to be collected. He had set his foot on a path from which there was no return. The shores of the known world were receding behind him, and ahead lay only the mist-shrouded, treacherous sea of time. Part 6, Shadows on Board. The Echo Hunter was a predator. Her lines were lean and sharp, her hull painted a deep, non-reflective black that seemed to swallow the light. Her 3 masts stood like bare trees against the bruised purple of the twilight sky, her sails currently furled tight. She was larger than any vessel Elard had ever served on in his youth, a hybrid of warship and exploration vessel, built for speed and silence. She smelled of fresh tar, new rope, and beneath it all, the faint, cold scent of gunpowder. As a longboat rowed them out to where she lay at anchor, Elard felt a profound sense of dislocation. The familiar solidity of land, of his inn, was gone, replaced by the restless, shifting plane of the sea. Lyrain, wrapped in blankets and cradled in his arms, seemed to sense the change, letting out a small, fretful murmur. Saelina sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the ship, her expression unreadable. They were helped aboard by a crew that moved with a quiet, disciplined efficiency. These were not the cheerful, bawdy sailors of merchant vessels. These men were hard-eyed and taciturn, their faces weathered into masks of permanent suspicion. They acknowledged Caelorn Travar with a curt nod, their eyes sliding over Elard and Saelina with open curiosity and a hint of unease. Travar stood at the helm, a picture of arrogant command. Captain Forlag, he called out to a broad-shouldered man with a face like a hatchet and a network of scars covering his bare arms. Our guests. See, they are settled in my cabin. We make for the shroud on the night tide. Captain Forlag's eyes, the color of flint, swept over them. He gave a grunt that might have been assent and gestured for them to follow. Travar's cabin was a spacious affair at the stern, paneled in dark wood and furnished with a large desk, locked cabinets, and a few comfortable bunks. A wide stern window looked out over the darkening wake of the ship. You and the child will stay here, Forlag said, his voice a low rumble. The woman, there's a smaller cabin adjacent. His tone made it clear this was not a request. Once alone, Elard laid Lyrain on one of the bunks. Her skin was clammy, her breathing a shallow rasp. He moistened her lips with a little water from a pitcher, his heart a tight knot of fear. The gentle rocking of the ship at anchor seemed to soothe her, and she slipped into a fitful sleep. Saelina stood by the stern window, watching the lights of Veridan's gate twinkle like fallen stars. The current pulls us already, she said softly. Can you feel it? Elard joined her. He could feel nothing but anxiety. All I feel is the water. Not the water. The deeper current. The flow of cause towards effect. Our departure from that city has already created ripples that are spreading backwards and forwards. The cult will know we are moving. As if summoned by her words, a commotion sounded on deck. Raised voices, the sound of a scuffle. Elard's hand went to the knife he now wore at his belt. He cracked the cabin door open. Another longboat had pulled alongside, and a new figure was climbing aboard with an insolent, easy grace. He was tall and wiry, dressed in clothes that had once been fine but were now salt-stained and worn. A red silk scarf was tied around his head, keeping long, dark hair from his face. He wore a single gold hoop in one ear and a smile that was both charming and deeply dangerous. Kalorn, you old pirate, the man called out, his voice rich and loud, carrying over the sounds of the ship. You didn't think you could mount an expedition to the edge of time without me, did you? Travar descended from the helm, his expression a mixture of annoyance and grudging respect. Morvian. I heard you were dead. The man, Morvian, threw back his head and laughed. It was a sound devoid of true mirth. Reports of my demise, as they say, have been greatly exaggerated. Though my former associates did make a spirited attempt. It seems my philosophy has become inconvenient to them. Elard stared, his blood running cold. This was Morvian Cedrus. But he had seen the man dead on his floor, his lifeblood pooling on the rug. This man was alive, vital, his eyes sparkling with manic intelligence. The corpse had been a pale imitation, what had Sayelina called it? A paradox. Sayelina was now at Elard's shoulder, her body tense. An echo, she whispered, her voice tight. A self that splintered off in a moment of temporal stress. This is the true Morvian. Or the dominant version, for now. He is more dangerous than the cultists. He believes his own lies. On deck, Travar was regarding the new arrival with cold calculation. Your cult wants you dead, Cedrus. Having you aboard is like storing gunpowder next to an open flame. The cult are reactionaries. Morvian declared, spreading his arms wide as if addressing an invisible audience. They wish to worship time, to be slaves to its flow. I wish to liberate it. And you, Kalorn, you wish to exploit it. Our interests, for the moment, are aligned. You need a navigator who can read the signs the map will reveal. The old texts, the starships that haven't happened yet. I am the only man alive who can do that. He turned then, and his gaze, sharp and penetrating, landed directly on Elard and Sayelina in the cabin doorway. His smile widened. Ah! And the key players are here. The guardian of the old order. And the father, the wild card. The one the heart itself seems to have chosen. How fascinating. He strode towards them, ignoring the glares of the crew. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes sweeping over Elard with an appraising, almost hungry look. So you are the man who holds the map. The man who would use the heart to mend a single, fragile thread. A noble goal. A small goal. It's the only goal that matters to me, Elard said, his voice low. Is it? Morvian's smile was condescending. What if I told you that by saving your daughter, you could save everyone? That the power of the heart could be used not just to heal one child, but to prevent all sickness? To undo all wars? To bring back every soul lost to a cruel and random universe? He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The cult wants to destroy the heart out of fear. I want to use it. To perfect creation. Imagine, Elard. A world where no father ever has to watch his child suffer. We could build that world. Together. The words were a venomous honey, seeping into the cracks of Elard's resolve. They tapped directly into the raw, bleeding heart of his fear. A world where Lyrane not only lived, but thrived, in a paradise free of pain. It was a beautiful, terrifying dream. Do not listen, Sayelina's voice was a sharp command in his mind, though her lips didn't move. He offers a utopia built on a foundation of sand. To the perfect, the past is to unravel the present. Your daughter's life is precious because it is fleeting. To make it eternal, to remove all struggle, would be to make it meaningless. Morvian's eyes flickered to Sayelina, as if he had heard her silent warning. Still preaching sacrifice, guardian? Still insisting that pain is necessary? What a small, cruel god you serve. He turned and walked away, joining Travar at the helm, already pointing at the sky and speaking of navigational charts. The crew went back to their duties, but the atmosphere had changed. The ship was no longer just a vessel, it was a powder keg of conflicting ambitions. Trevar's thirst for discovery, Morvian's fanatical utopianism, and Elard's single-minded paternal love were now all confined within the wooden walls of the Echo Hunter. As the ship's anchor was hauled up and the first black sails were unfurled, catching the night wind, Elard felt the shadows deepen around him. The greatest dangers, he realized, were not the cultists who might be pursuing them, or the mythical beasts of the deep. The danger was right here on board, in the form of a charming pirate with a vision of heaven that looked indistinguishable from hell. And his own heart was the battlefield. Part 7, Storm and Awakening. For 3 days, the Echo Hunter sliced through waters of an unnatural, glassy calm. The sea was a sheet of lead-gray silk, reflecting a sky the color of bleached bone. The wind, what little there was, felt stale and listless. The crew moved in a hushed silence, their superstitions fraying at the edges. This was not a natural calm. It was the stillness of a held breath. Morvian Cedrus spent his days perched in the crow's nest or hunched over charts in Trevar's cabin, muttering to himself about temporal doldrums and the silence before the symphony. His presence was a constant, low-grade irritation, a fly buzzing in the corner of Elard's vision. He would often catch the man staring at him with that unnerving, speculative gaze, as if Elard were a complex equation he was trying to solve. Elard kept to the cabin with Lyrane. Her condition was stable, but there was no improvement. The sea air did nothing to ease the rattling in her chest. He would sit by her bunk for hours, reading to her from one of the few storybooks he had brought, his voice a steady drone against the eerie quiet. Sayelina was a frequent but silent visitor. She would stand by the stern window, her back to the room, seemingly listening to something beyond the range of human hearing. On the evening of the third day, the pressure changed. It was a physical sensation, a sudden weight in the air that made ears pop and tempers shorten. The sky to the west began to bruise, a deep, swirling purple that bled into the gray. Captain Forelag barked orders, and the crew scrambled to batten down hatches and reef the sails. A storm was coming. But not like any storm Elard had ever seen. Morvian emerged from the cabin, his eyes alight with a fanatical joy. "It begins," he shouted to the wind. "The map stirs. It feels the confluence." Elard, against his better judgment, stepped out onto the deck. The air crackled with static, raising the hairs on his arms. He could feel the metal scroll case, which he kept wrapped and hidden in his pack, begin to grow warm. "Get below," Trevar ordered from the helm, his face grim. "This is no squall." But Elard was rooted to the spot. He saw Sayelina standing near the bow, her grey cloak whipping around her, facing the approaching maelstrom. She seemed to be welcoming it. The storm hit not with a gust of wind, but with a wave of silence. The world went mute. The creak of the ship, the shouts of the men, the lap of the water, all were extinguished. In that absolute void of sound, the map in Elard's pack flared with a light so intense it shone through the leather. A low hum began, vibrating up through the deck plates, into the bones of his feet. Then the sky tore open. It didn't rain. The clouds unraveled, not into water, but into light. A cascade of colors that had no name poured from the heavens, painting the sea in shifting, impossible hues. The waves themselves began to glow with a cold, phosphorescent fire. The Echo Hunter was no longer sailing on water, but on a sea of liquid light. Morvian was laughing, a wild, unhinged sound that was swallowed by the silence. He stumbled to the ship's rail and thrust his hands into the glowing water. "See," he screamed, his voice a tiny, tinny thing in the auditory void. "It is alive." But the true awakening was yet to come. The map's hum intensified, becoming a resonant chord that seemed to vibrate in sync with the ship itself. Elard, driven by an impulse he didn't understand, ran back to the cabin. He threw open his pack and grabbed the scroll case. It was hot to the touch, almost burning. As his fingers closed around it, the metal seams vanished. The case was no longer a container, but a single, solid piece of light. It flowed like liquid mercury in his hands, then elongated, stretching out into a shimmering, rectangular plane. It was no longer a map, but a slate. A screen. And on it, images flickered to life. He saw their ship, but from a perspective high above, as if seen by a bird. But the sea around it was not the glowing sea outside. It was a churning, violent expanse under a sky full of unfamiliar, sharp-edged constellations. The image shifted. He saw a jagged coastline, a waterfall that flowed upwards, a city of crystalline spires under a green sun. The images were not static, they were moving. They were possibilities. Potential futures. A deafening crack shattered the silence. It was the sound of the ship's mainsail. But it was not tearing. The thick, black canvas was transforming. Glowing lines, intricate and geometric, spread across its surface like veins of lightning. They were runes, ancient and powerful, burning with the same ethereal light as the sea. The same runes that had glowed on the temple walls in his vision. The sail was no longer cloth, it was a vast, magical schematic. Elard staggered back onto the deck, holding the shimmering slate before him. The crew had fallen to their knees, some praying, others simply staring in terror. The entire ship was now adorned with the glowing runes, on the decks, the masts, the rails. They pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light, like a sleeping leviathan's heartbeat. Morvian stared at the slate in Elard's hands, his face a mask of rapture. The cartographer's slate, he breathed. It's real. It doesn't just show the path, it interacts with it. It guides the vessel. He pointed a trembling finger at the mainsail. The runes. They are a navigational chart. They shift with the temporal currents. We are no longer sailing by wind and stars. We are sailing by the flow of time itself. Caelorn Trevar, for the first time, looked genuinely unnerved. The sheer, visceral power on display was beyond his experience. This was not a treasure to be collected, it was a force of nature. Cedris. Can you read it? Can you steer by it? Morvian's eyes were wide, darting between the slate and the sails. I can try. The principles are, the variables are infinite. He rushed to the helm, shoving the stunned helmsman aside. His hands gripped the wheel, but it was clear the ship was no longer entirely under mechanical control. It was turning, slowly, guided by the pulsing runes on the sails, aligning itself with a current that was not water. Elard looked at Selina. She had turned from the bow and was walking towards him through the silent, glowing chaos. The colored light from the sky played across her face, making her look like a goddess stepped down from a storm. The map has awakened, her voice sounded clear in his mind, cutting through the bedlam. It has bonded with you, Elard. You are the catalyst. Your love for your daughter, your singular purpose, it focuses the map's power. You are not just holding it. You are part of its circuitry now. He looked down at the slate. The image had stabilized. It showed a clear path through the raging, impossible seas, a tunnel of calm, glowing water leading towards a speck of land on the horizon. The island of eternity. The storm of light began to recede as quickly as it had come. The colors faded from the sky, the phosphorescence dimmed in the water, and the sound returned with a rush, the wind, the waves, the creaking of the ship. The glowing runes on the sails and decks faded, but did not entirely vanish. They remained as faint, shimmering scars on the wood and canvas, a permanent testament to their journey into the impossible. The Echo Hunter was now sailing on a normal, dark sea under a starry night sky. But everything had changed. The ship was awake. The map was a living thing in Elard's hands. And they were on a course charted not by man, but by time itself. The grand, philosophical conflict had become terrifyingly real. They were no longer hunters. They were the hunted, sailing a sentient ship into the heart of a mystery that was rapidly rewriting the rules of reality. Part 8, Two Hearts. The world after the storm was both the same and fundamentally altered. The Echo Hunter cut through the night sea, but it was now a vessel marked, its black sails and dark hull etched with the faint, persistent glow of the runes. They pulsed with a soft, steady light, a silent heartbeat guiding their passage. The crew moved with a new reverence, their superstitious fear tempered by a raw, awestruck wonder. They no longer saw Elard as just a passenger, they saw him as the man who had held a piece of the storm in his hands. They gave him a wide berth, their glances a mixture of fear and something akin to worship. Elard felt the change within himself, too. The cartographer's slate, now dormant and once again a simple, seamless metal case, felt different in his pack. It was no longer an object he carried, it was an organ, a part of his own physiology. He could feel a faint hum from it, a vibration that resonated in his teeth, a constant, low-level awareness of the ship's position not in space, but in the flowing river of causality. It was a disorienting, nauseating sensation, like having a second set of senses tuned to a dimension he couldn't see. He spent his days in a state of heightened anxiety, split between the slate's eerie pull and Lyrane's bedside. The sea air did nothing to improve her condition. If anything, the farther they sailed from the known world, the weaker she seemed to become, as if her thread to reality was stretching thin. Her sleep was fitful, plagued by fevered dreams where she murmured about the lady in the light and the ticking inside the mountain. The only anchor in this sea of strangeness was Saelina. She began to seek him out during the long, quiet hours when Lyrane slept. They would stand together at the stern rail, watching the luminescent wake of their passage fade into the darkness. At first, their conversations were practical, focused on the map, the island, the nature of the cult. But slowly, inevitably, the walls began to crumble. It started one night when the sea was like black glass, reflecting a sky dusted with alien constellations. Morvian had been particularly insufferable, holding court on the quarterdeck, expounding on his vision of a temporally liberated humanity. Elard had retreated, his head throbbing with the man's grandiloquent madness. "He speaks of love," Elard muttered, leaning heavily on the rail. "A world without loss. But it's not love. It's control. He doesn't want to end suffering, he wants to be the one who decides who suffers." Saelina stood beside him, her profile silvered by the starlight. "Love is not the absence of pain, Elard. It is the willingness to share it. To be vulnerable to it. Morvian's vision is a world without vulnerability. A world without true connection. It would be a beautiful, empty shell." He turned to look at her. "Is that what the heart is? A guarantee of vulnerability?" "The heart is the guarantee of choice," she said, her twilight eyes meeting his. "It ensures that every moment, every decision, has weight. That a kiss is precious because it might be the last. That a child's laughter is a miracle because it is fleeting. Without the sequence, without the finality of time, nothing has meaning. Love becomes a habit, not a conquest of the soul." Her words resonated in the hollow spaces Morvian's rhetoric had created. They were not the cold, philosophical axioms of a guardian, they were the heartfelt convictions of a being who had witnessed the alternative. He saw the sorrow in her eyes, a sorrow accumulated over lifetimes of watching mortals love and lose. "You've seen it, haven't you?" he asked softly. "You've seen what happens when time breaks." She nodded slowly, a profound weariness settling on her features. "I am a child of the heart, Elard. My spirit is woven from its energy. I have existed as long as it has, a sentinel outside the flow. I have seen echoes of broken timelines. Worlds where a single moment of regret was looped into an eternal hell. Worlds where a great victory was never achieved, leaving a stagnant, joyless peace. I have seen lovers forever reaching for each other across a second that never ends, their passion frozen into a torment." She looked down at her hands. "Morvian offers a paradise. I have seen the hell that paradise becomes." Her vulnerability was a crack in her serene facade, and through it, Elard saw not an ancient, powerful being, but a woman. A woman burdened with an unimaginable duty, isolated by her knowledge, and achingly lonely. The same loneliness he had carried since his wife had died, the loneliness that had deepened with Lyrane's illness. "I'm sorry," he said, the words inadequate. She looked up, surprised. "For what?" "For the weight you carry. For the things you've had to see. It's too much for one person." A faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "I am not a person, Elard. Not in the way you are." "You feel," he countered, his voice barely a whisper. "You care. That makes you a person to me." The space between them crackled with a new kind of energy, different from the map's hum. It was warmer, more terrifying. The shared understanding of sacrifice, the mutual recognition of loneliness, was drawing them together with a force as undeniable as the tides. Another night, during a sudden, violent squall, they were forced into the relative shelter of the leeward side of the stern castle. The wind howled around them, the ship plunging through the waves. Elard braced himself against the wood, and Sayalina stood close, her back to the rail, her cloak whipping around them both. "Are you afraid?" he asked over the roar of the wind. "Of the storm?" "No. This is a weather pattern. It has a beginning and an end. I am afraid of things that have no end. Of choices that lead to eternal consequences." Her eyes searched his face in the dim light. "I am afraid for you, Elard. The path ahead, the cost. Tell me," he urged, leaning closer, the spray stinging his face. "Tell me what the sacrifice will be." "I cannot," she said, and for the first time, he heard a tremor of true emotion in her mental voice. "To know is to alter the choice. And the choice must be yours, and yours alone. It is the geometry of fate. But know this, whatever happens, my regard for you is not a part of my duty. It is the one variable I did not foresee." And then her hand, cool and steady, found his where it gripped the railing. It was not a grand gesture. It was a simple touch. But in that moment, with the storm raging around them and the glowing runes of the ship pulsing like a heartbeat, it felt more intimate than any embrace. It was a connection that bypassed words, a silent acknowledgement of the bond forming between them. He turned his hand under hers, their fingers intertwining. He saw the surprise in her eyes, and then a slow, dawning acceptance. The guardian and the father, the eternal and the ephemeral, found a common ground in the simple, terrifying act of touching. No more words were needed. They stood there, hand in hand, as the echo hunter rode out the storm. Two hearts, beating in the darkness, one bound by destiny, the other by love, slowly, inevitably, becoming one. Part 9, Revolt of the Cult. The intimacy of the storm was a stolen moment, a pocket of quiet truth in the escalating tension aboard the Echo Hunter. The touch of Sayalina's hand was a brand on Elard's skin, a warmth he carried with him like a secret. But in the cold light of day, the ship felt more like a prison than a vessel. The glowing runes, once a marvel, now seemed like the bars of a cage, and their fellow passengers were the jailers. Morvian Cedrus had become bolder, his charisma a toxin seeping into the crew. He no longer confined his lectures to Travar. He walked the decks, a pirate prophet, his voice a compelling instrument as he painted his vision of a world unchained. "Think of it, lads," he'd cry, standing on a coil of rope, the wind tugging at his red scarf. "No more goodbyes. No more watching a shipmate fall to a fever or a blade, lost forever. We could pull them back from the brink. We could sail these seas eternally, a brotherhood beyond death." He targeted their vulnerabilities. To a man worried about a sick mother ashore, he promised a cure from a future yet to be. To another nursing a grudge over a lost love, he whispered of second chances, of rewriting a single, fateful argument. He was not selling power, he was selling absolution. And the crew, men living on the knife's edge of mortality, were a captive audience. Their glances towards Elard and Sayalina shifted from awe to resentment. They were the representatives of the old order, the ones who insisted on the sanctity of a timeline that included their pain. Caelorn Travar watched it all with a detached, analytical eye. He saw the mutiny brewing but seemed to consider it just another variable in his grand equation. He was a gambler, and Morvian's revolt was a bet he seemed willing to hedge. The confrontation came on a night when the sea was preternaturally calm again, and the air hummed with a taut energy. Elard was in the cabin, trying to spoon a thin broth into Lyrane's mouth. She was weaker than ever, her eyes sunken, her skin translucent. Each labored breath was a dagger in his heart. The door burst open without a knock. Morvian stood there, flanked by Captain Forlag and a half-dozen of the bulliest crewmen. Their faces were set in grim lines of determination. "The time for discussion is over, innkeeper," Morvian said, his voice dangerously pleasant. "We are approaching the temporal confluence. The moment when the path to the island is most clear. We need the slate." Elard stood up slowly, placing himself between the intruders and Lyrane's bunk. "It stays with me." "Your attachment to it is sentimental," Morvian scoffed. "It is a tool. A key. And you are a locksmith who refuses to turn it for fear of the noise." "We are not afraid of the noise, Elard. We welcome the symphony." "You're talking about destroying the world to save it," Elard shot back, his voice tight with anger. "I won't let you use that thing to play God." "God?" Morvian laughed. "No. We seek to fire the God who created a universe with cancer in its children and tempests that drown honest men. We will become our own gods." He took a step forward. "Give me the slate. Your daughter will be the first citizen of the new age. I swear it to you." It was the same offer, but now it was a threat. The crewmen behind him tightened their grips on their belaying pins and knives. Forlag's hand rested on the hilt of his cutlass. "Morvian," a calm voice cut through the tension. Saelina stood in the doorway to the adjoining cabin. She had entered without a sound. Her gaze swept over the armed men, and there was no fear in her eyes, only a deep, ancient sadness. "This path leads only to your own erasure. You cannot control the chaos you wish to unleash." "Ah, the guardian of the sacred timeline," Morvian sneered, turning his manic energy on her. "The high priestess of sacrifice. Tell me, Saelina, how many millions have suffered and died to maintain your precious balance? Are you proud of your work?" "I am its custodian, not its author," she replied, her mental voice ringing clear in the confined space. "I do not claim to understand the reasons for pain. I only know that without the framework of time, pain has no context, and therefore, no end." "We'll take our chances," Forlag grunted, speaking for the first time. His flinty eyes were on Elard. "The map, now. Or we take it from you." Elard's mind raced. He was outnumbered. He had his knife, but it was a pathetic defense against these men. He looked at Lyrane, so fragile on the bunk. He couldn't let a fight happen here. Could he trust Morvian's promise? Was a life for his daughter in a broken world better than no life at all? The temptation was a serpent, coiling around his resolve. "Do not," Saelina's voice was a whipcrack in his mind. "He lies. The first act of a broken timeline would be to eliminate the anomaly that broke it. Lyrane's thread would be the first to snap. He offers a life that cannot exist." Morvian's smile widened, as if he could sense their silent communication. "Having a council of war, are we? Let me make my final offer, Elard. Join me. You have a connection to the map I do not. Together, we can guide the energy. We can be surgeons, not barbarians. We can save your daughter and create a better world. A father's love is the most powerful force in existence. Use it. Don't let her die for a principle." The words were perfectly aimed, striking the core of his being. He saw Lyrane's face, her brave smile. He heard her cough. He felt the crushing weight of her impending death. What was the world to him compared to that? What were principles? He met Saelina's gaze. In her twilight eyes, he saw no judgment, only a profound understanding of the agony of his choice. She knew the cost of love. She had borne it for eons. And in that moment, he understood the true nature of the sacrifice. It wasn't about choosing between his daughter and the world. It was about choosing what kind of world she would live in. A world of meaning, where her life, however short, was part of a beautiful, tragic, coherent story. Or a chaotic, meaningless void where her salvation would be an empty gesture. He took a deep breath, the weight of eternity on his shoulders. "Get out," Elard said, his voice low but steady. Morvian's smile vanished. "What?" "Get out of this cabin," Elard repeated, stepping forward, his own fear burned away by a cold, clear certainty. "The map stays with me. We will find the island. We will secure the heart. And its power will be used to heal my daughter within the flow of time, not outside of it. I will not help you burn down the library to save a single book." For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with violence. Forlag's knuckles were white on his cutlass. Then, Morvian let out a short, bitter laugh. "A noble sentiment," he said, his eyes cold. "And a fatal one." He gestured to his men. "Take it." As the crewmen surged forward, Sayelina moved. She didn't attack them. She simply raised her hands, and the air in the cabin thickened. The men's movements slowed, becoming dreamlike, their faces frozen in masks of effort. It was the same temporal stasis she had used on the cultist leader, but on a larger scale. The strain was immediate, a trickle of blood seeped from her nose. "Run," her voice screamed in Elard's mind. "To the deck. Now." Elard didn't hesitate. He snatched up Lyrane, blankets and all, and shoved past the slowed-moving crewman. He burst out onto the deck, Sayelina right behind him. The moment they crossed the threshold, he heard the cabin erupt behind them as the stasis broke. The revolt was now open. The Echo Hunter was no longer a ship on a quest. It was a battleground for the soul of time itself. Part 10, The Island of Eternity. The deck of the Echo Hunter was chaos given form. The night was split by shouts, the clash of steel, and the percussive blast of a Wheelock pistol. The crew loyal to Travar, a smaller, grim-faced contingent, fought a desperate, retreating action against Morvian's mutineers. The glowing runes on the ship's timbers pulsed erratically, as if the vessel itself was distressed by the conflict raging upon it. Elard clutched Lyrane to his chest, her small body a precious, terrifying weight. Sayelina was a whirlwind at his side. She didn't fight with a blade, but with subtle manipulations of time. A mutineer's swing would slow just enough for a loyalist to parry, a boarding axe aimed at Elard would inexplicably slip from its owner's grasp. But each intervention cost her. She grew paler, her movements less fluid. She was bending local causality to its breaking point. To the longboat. Travar's voice cut through the din. He was fighting like a demon, his fine clothes splattered with blood, his face a mask of cold fury. He had gambled and lost, and now he was fighting for his life. He, Forlag, and a handful of others formed a shield around Elard and Sayelina, cutting a path towards the starboard side where a single longboat was being hastily lowered. They reached the rail. The sea below was a black abyss. The longboat, a tiny, fragile shell, bobbed on the swells. "Get in." Travar snarled, parrying a blow from a mutineer. "The island has to be close. The map will guide you." Elard hesitated, looking back at the ship, at the men dying for a cause they barely understood. "What about you?" "This is my ship." Travar roared, shoving him towards the rope ladder. "I'll deal with the philosopher. Go. Complete the damn quest." There was no more time. Elard, with Lyrane in one arm, began the treacherous descent. Sayelina followed. Just as their feet touched the longboat's deck, a figure leaped from the Echo Hunter's rail, landing with a thud among them. It was Morvian, his eyes blazing with triumph and madness. He held a pistol, aimed directly at Elard. The map, Viren. Or I scatter the child's brains across the sea. Before Elard could react, Travar swung down the ladder, his cutlass a silver arc in the darkness. He knocked the pistol from Morvian's hand. The game's not over, Cedrus. The two men fell into a vicious struggle at the stern of the small boat. Cast off. Saelina cried to the two loyal crewmen who had joined them. They slashed the ropes. The longboat drifted away from the black hull of the Echo Hunter, the sounds of battle fading into the night, replaced by the slap of water against wood and the ragged breaths of the wounded. Elard laid Lyrain on the bottom of the boat and turned to the cartographer's slate. As his hands touched the cool metal, it flared to life. The image was no longer a chaotic jumble. It showed their longboat, a tiny speck on a vast, dark ocean. And ahead, glowing with an intense, greenish-white radiance, was an island. It was close. Impossibly close. They rowed. The two sailors pulled at the oars with a frantic strength born of terror. Elard held the slate, its light their only compass. The air grew thick and heavy, tasting of ozone and wet stone. The water around them began to change. Patches of it glowed with a soft, internal light, and within those patches, Elard saw fleeting images, a dinosaur stepping through a primordial jungle, a Roman galley under full sail, a city of soaring glass towers. The past, present, and future were bleeding together. Then, they saw it. The island of eternity rose from the sea not as a landmass, but as a mountain of black, obsidian stone, so sheer it seemed to have been thrust vertically from the ocean floor. It was wreathed in a perpetual, shimmering mist that glowed with the same greenish light as the slate. There was no beach, no welcoming shore. Only cliffs that plunged into the abyss. As they drew nearer, the temporal distortions became violent. One of the sailors, a man named Rorik, let out a choked cry. He dropped his oar, clutching his head. "No, no, it can't be," he moaned. Elard watched in horror as the man's face began to flicker. One second he was a grizzled sailor in his 40s, the next, a beardless youth, then a wizened old man with milky eyes. He was experiencing his entire lifespan at once, his mind shattering under the onslaught. With a final, agonized scream, he collapsed, unmoving. The other sailor, terrified, stopped rowing. "It's a cursed place. We can't go there." It was then that Morvian, who had finally subdued a wounded Travar, stood up in the rocking boat. He was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were fixed on the island with a rapturous hunger. "Don't you see?" he whispered. "We're here. The source. The wound in the world where time bleeds through." He looked at Elard, and his expression was one of pity. "Look at your daughter, Viren. Look at her now." Elard turned. Lyrain was stirring. But something was wrong. Her form flickered. For a heart-stopping second, he saw her as a healthy young woman of maybe 20, her cheeks rosy, her eyes bright with life. Then she was a wizened crone, skin like parchment, taking a last, rattling breath. Then she was the sick child again. Then a babe in swaddling clothes. The island's power was unmaking her chronology, showing him every version of her at once. It was the most beautiful and most horrifying thing he had ever witnessed. "The heart can fix this," Morvian insisted. "It can anchor her to one timeline. The one where she lives." Saelina, her voice strained, pointed towards the base of the cliff. "There. A cave entrance. It is the only way." Somehow, they navigated the treacherous currents and brought the longboat into a narrow, dark opening in the rock. The moment they passed from the open sea into the tunnel, the violent temporal fluctuation ceased. The air was still and cold. The only light came from the slate and the faint, green glow emanating from deep within the mountain. They moored the boat to a natural stone pier. Travar was barely conscious, leaning heavily on the remaining sailor. Morvian bounded onto the pier, his energy restored. Elard carried Lyrain, who had stabilized back into her sickly, present self form. Sayalina led the way, her face a mask of grim determination. They were inside the mountain. And the Temple of the Heart awaited. Part 11, The Temple of the Heart. The tunnel was not dark for long. The same greenish-white light that haloed the island grew stronger, illuminating a passageway that was clearly not natural. The walls were smooth, polished obsidian, inscribed with the same glowing runes that adorned the Echo Hunter. They pulsed with a slow, rhythmic light, a silent, guiding heartbeat leading them deeper into the mountain. The air was cold and carried a profound silence, the kind that exists in deep space or at the bottom of the sea. It was the silence of immense age. They moved in a ragged procession. Morvian led, his steps quick and eager, drawn forward by the siren song of the light. Elard followed, Viren a slight, feverish weight in his arms, her every shallow breath a counterpoint to the hum of the slate in his pack. Sayalina walked beside him, a bastion of calm in the unnatural stillness. Behind them, the lone remaining sailor half-carried, half-dragged a semi-conscious Kalorn Travar, whose muttered curses were the only human sounds in the vast, silent hall. The tunnel opened abruptly into a cavern of such scale that it stole the breath away. This was the Temple of the Heart. It was a perfect sphere, so vast the ceiling was lost in gloom. The floor, walls, and distant ceiling were all of the same black, polished obsidian, making it impossible to gauge depth or distance. The only features were a series of narrow, crystalline bridges that arced over a seemingly bottomless abyss, leading towards the center of the cavern. And in the center, suspended in mid-air, was the source of the light. The heart of time. It was not what Elard had expected. It was not a jewel or a crystal, but a complex, swirling vortex of light, contained within a lattice of pure energy. It resembled a miniature galaxy, a nebula of incandescent gas and shimmering timelines, all spinning around a core of blinding white intensity. It pulsed, and with each pulse, Elard felt a wave of everything. The joy of a birth, the agony of a death, the quiet satisfaction of a sunset, the terror of a storm. It was the emotional echo of all of existence, concentrated into a single, rhythmic beat. It was beautiful and terrifying in a way that made the very concept of morality feel small and quaint. But they were not alone in the temple. Arrayed around the periphery of the cavern, standing motionless on the bridges and ledges, were figures. Dozens of them. They were humanoid, carved from the same black obsidian as the temple, but they were not statues. As Elard watched, one of them turned its head, its featureless face regarding them with a placid, ancient emptiness. They were guardians. And they were stirring from their millennia-long vigil. Morvian let out a gasp of triumph. "Behold," he cried, his voice tiny and insignificant in the vast space. "The engine of reality." He started forward onto the nearest crystalline bridge. The moment his foot touched it, the guardians moved. Not with aggression, but with a slow, inexorable purpose. They glided across the smooth stone, converging on the bridges, blocking the paths to the heart. "They will not allow us to pass," Sayalina said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "They are the immune system of time. We are an infection. Then we fight." Morvian snarled, drawing his cutlass. He charged at the nearest guardian. His blade struck the obsidian form with a sound like a bell being struck. The guardian did not flinch. It simply reached out a hand, and where it touched Morvian's arm, the flesh and bone did not break or bruise, it aged. In seconds, Morvian's arm withered, the skin becoming desiccated, the muscle atrophy. He screamed, a raw sound of shock and pain, and stumbled back. The guardian did not pursue. It simply returned to its post. "They don't kill," Travar muttered, leaning against the wall, his eyes wide with a pain that was more than physical. "They retire you." Panic began to set in. They were trapped. The heart was right there, its power a palpable force, and they were utterly cut off from it. It was then that Sayalina stepped forward. She did not walk onto the bridge. She walked to the edge of the abyss and stood there, facing the heart. She raised her arms, and began to change. Her grey cloak dissolved into motes of light. Her form began to glow with the same ethereal radiance as the heart. Her physicality seemed to soften, to become less solid. She was unwinding, revealing her true nature. "I am Sayalina," her voice echoed, not in their ears, but in their minds, in their souls. "The last guardian. My spirit is not bound to the heart. I am a fragment of the heart. A spark of consciousness sent into the world to guide those who are chosen." She turned to look at Elard, and her face was a mask of love and infinite sadness. "The guardians will not harm me. They recognize their source. And they will recognize the one I vouch for." She held out her hand to him. "Come, Elard. You must come alone. The final choice is yours." Elard looked from her luminous form to Lyrain, pale and still in his arms. He looked at Travar's broken body, at Morvian's aged, useless arm, at the sailor cowering in fear. This was the moment. The geometry of fate had led him here, to the precipice. He laid Lyrain gently on the stone floor, kissing her fevered forehead. Then, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, he walked to the edge and took Sayalina's hand. Her touch was electric. It was not the touch of a hand, but of a star. Energy flowed through him, a current of pure time. The guardians, who had been blocking the way, parted. They bowed their heads as one, creating a clear path across the bridge. Hand in hand, Elard and Sayalina walked towards the swirling vortex of the heart. The light enveloped them, warm and welcoming. It was not a hostile force, it was a homecoming. They passed through the energy lattice and found themselves in a pocket of calm at the very center. Here, the roaring silence of the heart was a gentle hum. The light was soft, bathing them in a private, eternal twilight. The grand quest, the mutiny, the storm, it all fell away. There was only the two of them, suspended in the eye of the universe. "This is all the time we have," Sayalina said, her form now almost entirely light, though he could still feel the shape of her in his arms. "A single moment, outside the flow. A moment that must last us for eternity." She did not need to explain. He understood. The sacrifice was not in the future. It was now. To touch the heart, to use its power, would require a balance. Her existence was the counterweight. The guardian must be reabsorbed to allow the artifact to be wielded. But before that, they had this. A night outside of time. There, in the heart of all creation, Elard kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion alone, but of grief, of gratitude, of a love that had been forged in the crucible of impossible choices. It was a goodbye and a greeting, all at once. And she kissed him back with the accumulated longing of 1,000 lifetimes. They did not speak. Words were inadequate for the universe contained within that moment. They spoke with touch, with breath, with the silent communion of two souls recognizing their perfect, tragic fit. He learned the geography of her light, and she, the solid, mortal truth of his love. It was a union that transcended the physical, a merging of purpose and desire that would forever be the defining moment of Elard's existence. It was a night that contained a lifetime of love. And when the soft, greenish light began to brighten towards a dawn that was not a dawn, they both knew it was over. "The cult is here," Sayalina said, her voice faint. "They have followed. Morvian's echo has drawn them. The choice is now, Elard. You know what you must do." She was fading, her light beginning to stream away, drawn back into the swirling mass of the heart. He held her tighter, a desperate, futile gesture. "Some loves are not bound by years," she whispered, her voice the faintest echo. "They are bound by moments. A single moment can contain a universe. Ours did." And then she was gone. Her light dissolved into the greater light of the heart. Elard was alone, kneeling at the center of the vortex, the power of time itself pulsing around him, and an emptiness in his soul that was more vast than the temple, more profound than the abyss. The moment of love was over. The moment of sacrifice had begun. Part 12, Choice and Sacrifice. The warmth of Sayalina's light was gone, replaced by the cold, omnipotent hum of the heart. Elard knelt at the center of the vortex, the emotional echo of their night together a fresh, bleeding wound. The emptiness she left behind was a void that threatened to swallow him whole. But the universe, in its cruel, precise mechanics, did not allow for grief. It demanded a choice. The sound of violence from the temple entrance shattered the sacred silence. Shouts, the clash of steel, and the sizzling crackle of the guardian's aging touch echoed through the cavern. The cult of the echo had arrived. Morvian's presence, his very existence as a temporal paradox, had been a beacon they could not ignore. Elard rose to his feet. The heart of time pulsed before him, no longer an abstract concept, but a tool. A weapon. He could feel its power thrumming through him, a symphony of infinite possibilities. He saw them all, laid out like threads in a tapestry. One thread, glowing with a seductive, golden light, Morvian's promise. He could seize the heart. He could channel its energy, not to shatter it, but to bend it. He could rewind time to the moment before Lyrain fell ill. He could create a world where the sickness never took root. He could have his daughter, whole and healthy. He could even, perhaps, find a way to pull Sayalina back from the heart, to have them both. It was a world of second chances, a paradise woven from a father's love. But as he focused on that thread, he saw the frayed edges. He saw the other threads it would snap. The Echo Hunter would never have been built. Travar would remain a bored merchant prince. The loyal sailors would die in other, meaningless conflicts. And Sayalina, her sacrifice would be rendered meaningless, her love for him reduced to a deleted variable in a rewritten equation. The paradise was a lie. It was a painting over a rotten canvas. Another thread, sharp and clear as ice, Sayalina's path. He could use the heart to reinforce the timeline. To seal the wound in reality forever. He could banish the cult, stabilize the flow of cause and effect. Lyrain would die, as was always her fate. But her death would have meaning. It would be part of a coherent, beautiful, tragic story. It was the path of duty, of acceptance. The path of a love strong enough to let go. He saw the third thread, dark and chaotic, Morvian's true desire. If the cult seized the heart, they would not bend it, they would break it. The vortex would become a cancer, eating away at the past, present, and future until nothing was left but a screaming, static chaos. It was the end of everything. The choice was not between his daughter and the world. It was between a beautiful, true memory and a beautiful, false future. Between a love that accepted loss and a love that sought to erase it. The fighting at the entrance grew closer. He saw Morvian, his aged arm hanging useless, using a discarded cutlass to fight a rearguard action against black-clad cultists. He saw Travar, leaning against a wall, firing his pistol with shaking hands. He saw the last sailor fall, his body aging to dust in seconds. And he saw Lyrain, still lying where he had left her, small and helpless on the cold stone. He saw her not as she was, but as she could be. He saw her growing up in a world of sequence, of sunrises and sunsets. He saw her experiencing joy and sorrow, love and heartbreak. He saw her life as a story. A short story, yes, but a complete one. Her bravery, her pure heart, they were not flaws to be corrected by godlike power, they were the essence of her, made precious by their fragility. Morvian broke through the cultists and stumbled towards the central bridge, his eyes fixed on Elard and the heart. "Now, Viren," he screamed, his voice ragged. "Now. Do it. Save her. It is the only way." Their eyes met across the chasm. In Morvian's, Elard saw the reflection of his own deepest desire, twisted into a fanatical creed. He saw the man he could become. Elard made his decision. He turned his back on the golden thread of paradise. He reached into the heart of time, not with violence, but with a profound, sorrowful acceptance. He did not try to control it. He asked it for strength. A wave of energy erupted from the vortex, pure and stabilizing. It washed over the temple. The advancing cultists cried out as their forms solidified, their paradoxes resolving in a flash of light that erased them from existence. The black-clad figures simply unwound, their timelines snapping back into place. Morvian was thrown back by the force. He stared at Elard, not with anger, but with a devastating, final understanding. You chose the tragedy," he whispered, a line of blood trickling from his lip. "You chose to let her die." "I chose to let her life have meaning," Elard said, his voice steady, though tears streamed down his face. The energy wave hit Morvian. As a living paradox, he had no stable timeline to return to. He began to flicker, his form shifting through a dozen different versions of himself, a young scholar, a charismatic pirate, a broken old man. "A universe of pain," he gasped. "And you, its chief celebrant." Then, with a sound like a sigh, he dissolved into a shower of golden sparks that were absorbed by the hungry void of the abyss. The temple fell silent. The guardians, their purpose fulfilled, returned to their posts, becoming motionless obsidian once more. Travar stared, his pistol hanging limp in his hand, the full weight of what had transpired finally crushing his mercenary soul. Elard's work was not done. The heart, used to reinforce the timeline, was draining rapidly. The vortex began to shrink, to collapse in on itself. But the wound was not yet fully sealed. It required a final anchor. A sacrifice to balance the scales of the energy he had expended. Sayelina had been the guardian. Her sacrifice had opened the path. Now, it required a heart. He looked at Lyrain. He could still save her. There was just enough power left. He could pull her thread from the tapestry, place her outside the flow, a frozen, eternal child in a dead universe. He walked to her, kneeling beside her small form. He brushed the hair from her forehead. Her eyes fluttered open. "Papa," she whispered. "Did we find it? The cure?" He smiled, a smile that held all the love and all the sorrow in the world. "Yes, little wave," he lied, his voice breaking. "We found it. You're going to be all right. You're going to have such a wonderful life." Her eyes, so trusting, searched his. She saw the tears. "Then why are you sad?" "Because," he said, leaning down to kiss her forehead one last time, "every cure has a cost. And this one is worth it." He poured the last dregs of the heart's power into her. Not to cure her body, but to bless her soul. To give her peace. To ensure that her remaining days, however few, would be free of fear, filled with the warmth of his love. He felt the energy flow into her, a gentle, radiant light that smoothed the lines of pain from her face. She smiled, a true, peaceful smile, and closed her eyes, slipping into a deep, natural sleep. The heart was almost gone. The vortex was now a small, swirling point of light. It demanded its anchor. Elard stood and walked back to the center. He thought of Sayelina. Of their single, perfect night. He thought of Lyrain's smile. He had saved them both, in the only way that mattered. He spread his arms wide. The vortex surged forward, not as a destructive force, but as a final, embracing light. It did not hurt. It felt like coming home. It felt like Sayelina's touch. The light swallowed him. Epilogue, the shore of forever. The sound was the first thing to return. Not a sound of triumph, or of peace, but the low, rhythmic hiss of water withdrawing over fine, black sand. Caelorn Travar stood on the shore, holding a sleeping Lyrain in his arms. They were on a beach, under a normal sun in a normal sky. The island of eternity was gone, sunk beneath the waves, its purpose fulfilled. The echo hunter was gone. He was alone, save for the child. In his hand, he held a single, smooth, grey stone. It was warm to the touch. It was all that remained of the heart of time. A paperweight for the tapestry of existence. He looked down at Lyrane. She would live. The physician in Veridan's gate would call it a miracle remission. She would grow up, haunted by dreams of a storm-tossed ship and a lady made of light, and a father who had loved her enough to sacrifice everything for the beauty of her brief, precious life. Travar would raise her as his own. It was the only story left to him that had any meaning. On the shore, there was no body. No artifact. Only the echo of a sacrifice, and the enduring, painful love that had made it. The geometry of fate was complete. The puzzle was solved. And the picture it revealed was both a tragedy and a testament to the fact that some loves are indeed bound, not by years, but by a single, universe-containing moment. The sea hissed its retreat, a sound like the world letting out a long, weary sigh.